Show. It's your boy, JD Costa.
It's your girl, Katniss.
And I'm the one and only Tay Jordan.
And together we are
the Nitty Gritty.
It's Tim Wise. You're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Everybody, this is Stephen Powell. You're now watching the Nitty Gritty Show. Check it out.
Hey, my name is Sherman Moss, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Hi, I'm Pastor Grant Thompson, aka G. Ainsworth, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Hey, I'm Anthony White, and this is the Nitty Gritty Show.
Yeah. Man, it's Jay Thompson. You're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
This is Max Powers, and you are watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
My name is Jay Grant Thompson, and guess what? You're in tune to the Nitty Gritty Show.
I'm Will Jawando, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Hey, my name is Mitch Holmes, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
This is Adeline Samuel. Go watch the Nitty Gritty Show.
This is Pastor Rob, and you're on the Nitty Gritty Show.
I'm Ray Pittman, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Hey, this is Shondy Ford of Ford Wilderness, and you're watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
Yo, what's going on? It's your boy Benny Black, and you are watching the Nitty Gritty Show.
It's time for the Nitty Gritty. Conversations be real live. It's time for the Nitty Gritty. The revolution's not televised. It's time for the Nitty Gritty. Reaching out to your conscious mind. It's time for the Nitty Gritty. More than talking, we're taking action. It's time for the Nitty Gritty.
Yo, what's going on, world? What's going on, Facebook? Everybody catching this live on listenvisionlive.com. It's your boy, Jay DeCosta.
It's your girl, Katniss.
It's your girl, your one and only Tay Jordan.
Together we are the Nitty Gritty. Look, I'm happy to be here today. Got a great show today. We're going to be talking about the black working class, a subject of passion for our guest here today, Dr. Robert J. Patterson. Actually, it's a topic of passion for all of us, and it should be for all of us in the community, because this definitely heavily affects us and what the next generation looks like if things are to progress in the direction they have been going. So happy to have this conversation. To tell you guys a little bit about Dr. Patterson, he's the chair for the Department of African American Studies there at Georgetown University, associate professor of African American Studies, also author of Exodus Politics and co-author of The Psychic Hold of Slavery. Has written various essays on W.B. Du Bois, Toni Morrison, the African American woman's writing in the 19th and 20th century, civil rights, Tyler Perry films, has been very active in the culture, doing various workshops on the black class, and there's various things affecting us through our history, and then also the politics of being black in a so-called post-racial America, right? You got a lot of great stuff out there. I'm so happy that we'll be able to go dig into detail. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so definitely excited to have you on. And of course, before we get down to the nitty-gritty, we got to give these to hell withs, and we got to give these blessing twos. I'm going to be as quick as possible. We got 3 to hell withs. First one, this new doll phenomenon. You guys might have heard about these robot sex dolls. Now, I'm not even surprised by it, because I think the overarching issue is that we live in a world that has all these fabricated connections, whether it's Facebook, various forms of social media. No one has real friends now. They just have people that like some of the stuff they post. And even in living in these large cities, we're surrounded by people all day, but some folks are so lonely they don't really have authentic and real connections anymore. So it doesn't surprise me that people would go for a synthetic connection, because we've been kind of pre-programming ourselves for that kind of stuff for the last probably 15 years. And it's just something to consider about that. What's the mindset of people that you will want to engage in something that's supposed to come from a place of love and friendship and relationship with an inanimate object that can't actually give any of that passion back to you? So it's just something to think about. There's been some funny jokes out there. Yeah, I laughed at them, but come on, realistically, brother got to have a real woman, but that's a topic for another day. I'm pretty sure we'll get on it again some more in depth. Also, got to give it to hell with to the government shutdown. That's crazy. I'm not going to go through all of it. I know some people want to talk about Obama when the government shut down. Difference was Democrats didn't run the House and the Senate. The last time that we seen a shutdown on this magnitude where one party controlled the executive branch in both houses was when Jimmy Carter was in office. Outside of that, we haven't seen this kind of foolery in our government. So this is really shameful. And then on top of that, the fact that it shut down because the Republicans want more military spending. Trump wants funding for a wall that he promised that the Mexicans was going to pay. We knew it was bull crap. I'm just saying we know it was going to come through. And the fact that I think the Democrats are fighting the good fight here, trying to preserve DACA and CHIP. The fact that Republicans want more military spending is crazy. It's already about 54% of our spending for the government. And then on top of that, when you think about what military spending means to those that benefit from it, the warmongers in the United States that have a lot of their factories are being ran through the prison system, whether it's the ballistic vests that are being made, bullets, our uniforms, or those are all, or majority of it is made through the prison system. So they're using free labor. So it's like they're just getting over. They're getting the government to spend a lot of money towards it. And then these guys are just getting rich for nothing. And then don't even get me started on contract work out there in the Middle East and so forth and so on. So it's really crazy. Prayers go out to anyone right now affected by that whose jobs may be in limbo because of it. I'm hoping that this country will get their crap together and get things up and running again. Obviously, we just need to impeach Trump. Moving on, gotta give. I struggle with this. I was actually talking about Kat about this earlier in the week. I didn't know if I was gonna do it or not, and then after I did some more research, I got all the details. Monique, gotta give her to hell with, and this is why. She wants $20 million for her Netflix special. I understand that the $500,000 they offered her is a slap in the face. She is a legend in the game. She's been doing her thing. When you look at women who have her resume, hardly anyone standing there next to her. I get it, but boo, you haven't done anything relevant in a while.
But she's an Oscar winner.
I get it, and therefore she deserved at least $5 million.
Yes,
I think so. And then I know she compared herself to Amy Schumer, and at the end of the day, Amy's people, they must have worked harder behind the scenes or whatever. Amy, I don't think was worth the $13 million or $12 million that she got. But her number is probably closer to $5 million. I understand the algorithm because she had more recent projects she had did, but she wasn't worth that. And I mean, come on, you're not gonna get what Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock get because these jokers are on like tour right now, charging $200 for tickets, and people they're buying them.
But until Dave Chappelle did his new special, what relevant had he done in years?
It's Dave Chappelle. It's like people like Jerry Seinfeld, but he's part of an elite crowd that can do that. Think about it. Let's just change gears. Talk about music. If Michael Jackson could not do anything for a long time, but if you hear rumors he wants to put out a new project, people will support it. Another person like that is Madonna. Beyonce's up there now. The Jay-Z's of the world. Justin Timberlake had done a lot. He hadn't done anything in music since Future Sex Love or Love Future Sex. I'm saying the album wrong. Y'all know what I mean. But then when he put that latest album out that he did a couple of years back, it was met with like people wanting it because he's on that level of artistry that people don't mind that you haven't been relevant in a while. We know you put out hot stuff. Monique looks like someone who's been struggling to work. It's not like she stopped working on her own. Her show got canceled. Hollywood kind of blackballed her because comments made. She's not on the same level of a Dave Chappelle.
Well, I also think it's because it's comedy. When's the last time Monique's done comedy? Because to my understanding, she did comedy in the very beginning of her career. Then she went into being a talk show host and then more into acting. I feel like we know her to be a comedian, but it's been such a long time, so they probably were like on the fence. And I feel like Monique really missed a big opportunity because Netflix is the way to go. Like Game of Thrones, they made pennies when they first started, but now they're making $1 million an episode. I feel like $500,000 was a slap in the face. She probably could have negotiated for a little bit more. Had she would have done it and had great success, now she can go back to the table and negotiate. Now you got to give me at least, $15 million because look at the views I got before. It's making yourself relevant again.
Well, I mean, I applaud Monique for bringing the light and attention to the situation. I think outside of the it being a race issue, it also shows you how gender plays a role. I mean, you look at Tracee Ellis Ross and her pushing the envelope on Blackish, and look what. I mean, I understand Anthony Anderson is the executive producer, but just in terms of gender, we know that women is paid less than what men are paid. We know that race plays a part as well. So I'm happy that Monique is pushing the envelope a bit. $500,000. I mean, you should say something. It's a smack.
That is a smack in the face, but the fact that she's demanding $20 million is crazy.
I mean, yeah. Well, you start high, you negotiate.
And I mean, come on, the number is more like 5. Monique, stop chirping.
Oh, but 500,000 ain't 5 either.
No, and I understand that. And if she had just said like, "Look, they not even trying to give me 5, y'all," she'll be on the blessings to list. But the fact that she said
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but when you think about Monique, did she even try to negotiate, or did she just go with the attitude?
I'm sure she
because
wanted
the
to
narrative.
negotiate.
Sorry, but the narrative nowadays about Monique is that she just be with the attitude.
Well, what happened is
Like,
Netflix.
that's the
like,
media
to clear it up, I did the research.
I don't know if it's. I don't know if that narrative is true, but it's like I'm just wondering, did she
put into that? Already.
Or
But pause. The information is, so we don't have to like talk about it and diatribe about it. The truth is, and it's already been put out, Netflix actually decided they didn't want to negotiate with her because they said the numbers were so far off.
Because she's the angry black woman. She has an attitude, and that's the popular narrative.
But I mean, the thing is, even with Amy Schumer, and I'm not backing her up, but they only negotiated $2 more million. They had offered her 11, she wanted 13.
Oh wow! So they offered her 11.
That's why I said the
nice?
slap in the face is that they were only offered 500, but she's wanting 20 million. Amy Schumer was overpaid. She should only got about 3.5
and they
herself.
start at 11. Ain't
So
that nice?
don't get me wrong, but I understand why they did it because Amy Schumer had just sold out Madison Square Garden twice, and she had just had a hot movie. You can't really say that about Monique. And Monique didn't leave the game like Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle left the game with $50 million on the table.
But one of the issues with Monique, I think, too, is that she does have more controversy. Aside from whether she was on top of the game, below the game, she does have controversy surrounding her, which is the most recent thing we recall is the you call it diatribe or the venting session that she had where she was talking about Lee Daniels at part of the comedy show. And so people at Netflix, I'm sure, probably had seen that, and they were weighing, I would imagine, the liability, right, or the risk she might pose to their brand too. And so I think that would factor in. And to agree with your point, I do think that all of that is related to there's already a set of stereotypes she's already being read at before she even comes to the table to begin with.
Right, and that's not fair.
Yeah, and I mean, it wasn't fair how she was treated. I just wanted to make it clear she ain't getting that 20 million. Like my pocket, if she was to come to DC right now and say she's charging $150 for a show, I would laugh. But meanwhile, I know I spent that money for Dave Chappelle. I'm just saying, even my pocket doesn't value it the same way. But that's just my personal opinion. Social media's don't come from me. That's fine. It's cool. That's what we do at the Nitty Gritty.
Here we
go. And blessings too, though. Blessings to all the various campaigns out there. There's a lot of black people running for campaigns right now in 2018. I want to always stress the importance of voting, especially throughout this year, because there's so many votes at hand. We've already had Will Jawando and Kelly Fox on the show. We have quite a few other politicians in the area that have reached out. They'll be coming on the show within the coming months. So this is going to be a big season for that. Keep on paying attention. Blessings to all those out there who has already won their campaigns and campaigning. And it's important that we donate money. We'll talk about this more later, but we learned recently that they were actually, Guy was telling Tay and Kat, all of us, that to even be considered on the ballot box, you have to raise X amount of dollars to even get there. So your contributions are important to these elections. Just wanted to put that out there. So blessings to those people. And then, but finally, ending on a real positive note here, blessings to the Women's March yesterday. Seemed like that was a good turnout. Seemed like a lot of celebrities had came through for that. I've heard of a lot of women that I knew personally saying they had canceled plans that they had already set up to go support that. So it seems like people had their priorities straight there. Blessings to the Me Too movement as that goes along. And I just think people need to come together there. Everyone's pointing fingers like, why did Oprah say this for this and that for this? I mean, at the end of the day, if people are trying to champion something positive, let's support that and uplift that, right? And definitely uplifting our women, especially our black women, is a big part of that.
Give them the 20 million, 15 million that they want.
I don't know about 20 million, Tay. Just saying. All right, but look, we're going to move on. Went a little longer today for blessings too, but I think the topic at hand warranted it. And, getting down to the nitty gritty, the black working class. We got two videos we're going to play. We're going to redefine, we heard the white working class a lot. And you're going to see there's a big difference between the white working class and the black working class. And that's why we have Dr. Patterson here to actually talk about that and then go into what does that mean for us and how we need to fix that, or some suggestions on how to fix that and things to be aware of. So, Jay, can you roll those videos for me? And we're going to get down to the nitty gritty.
Working class whites is a term thrown around a lot this election, but who belongs to that demographic exactly? And what do they want from our country's next leaders? The answers may surprise you. Working class whites is a term generally used to describe white Americans without a 4-year college degree. Approximately 64% of whites 25 and older fall into this category. Thanks to a CNN Kaiser Family Foundation poll, we know that this group is unhappy about the overall direction of the country. More than half are dissatisfied with the economy, and nearly half think America's best days are behind it. 64% of rural working class whites feel the federal government doesn't represent the views of people like them. Whites in this group are less optimistic about their children's futures than their working class counterparts of other races. And they have significantly harsher views on immigration. Yet the vast majority are optimistic about their lives, and few say they are angry. 2/3 of working class whites are homeowners. More than 60% say they are satisfied with their financial situation. Many working class whites do not see their lack of a college degree to be a problem. Half say they do not think their lives would be any different with a 4-year degree. It is important to note this group is not monolithic. Some are more optimistic that America's best days lie ahead. Those groups, urbanites, Democrats, those with higher incomes, and those with no religious preference.
Yeah, so I think these were two good videos to kind of get us started, defining some key numbers. Don't really want to focus on white people as much, but I think it's important to realize the mindset and the actual numbers, how that affects them as a working class and us. Right. Too often in politics, and I don't want to steal your thunder, we kind of combine middle class as middle class, but that does vary from social construct to social construct. So definitely wanted to get into that. And I guess if you can define for us, Dr. Patterson, what is the black working class? What are those kind of jobs? Right. I know you said in other interviews before, but just for our listeners, if you can kind of re-educate them.
No, I mean, so this is an interesting question. So the black working class, we could probably think of as blue collar lines of industries. And if we can think about that historically, at least, we can think about service industries, right? And so we know that going back to the 30s and 40s, there's domestics, right? Particularly where gendered by black women. You have black men in tenant farming jobs, railroad porters, and jobs like that. What's interesting, I'm gonna come back around to this, but what's also interesting is that in the 70s, some of those blue collar jobs could get you into the middle class, right? So you could move from the working class to the middle class. So sometimes students find it hard to believe that you could be a UPS driver and you could make over 100, you can make 6 figures, right? Because unions, because there's opportunities for advancement, and that has changed. And I think that in the second video, that's part of what it gets to, where it talks about people's life opportunities being less than what they were, because you don't have that mobility within some of those blue collar jobs. But anyway, but back to the point. So you have the nursing industry, you have the even in sort of like the airline industry, but it's not the pilots, of course, the flight attendants. It's the service sectors across the economy is where you see the working class and the black people disproportionately represented.
And that's just, and I think there's a lot of things there that people just don't pay attention to. I mean, like even here in DC, when you look at like security jobs, people that drive like the metro, the buses, there's a real opportunity to make money. But what we've seen, and I remember my granddad ever like always draw attention to this. There's like some things you'll see that whites will just walk away from once there's too much black leadership.
Right.
But then they stop putting into those industries.
Right.
And it's like they change the whole game up. So it's like just when we get into the car manufacturing, or just when we get into one thing, it's like they change the whole game up.
Right. And so to that point, so if we could think about the automation that happens in the 70s, from the 70s forward, so we move from having people who are doing some of these jobs to machines doing those jobs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then if you don't have the education to then operate the machines or to move into the more skilled jobs, then you'll be paced out of them. And one of the other things I think that's important to think about when we talk about the working class, and it's not just the jobs that they have. And so part of why I wanted to move from naming the job specifically to saying just more generally, think of service positions, because you can go anywhere and you can see that, in those positions. But I want to think too about the benefits that come along with those jobs, right? And so you're less likely to have 401ks, for example, or the percentage that the employer might contribute to it are probably lower. So your wages are already lower, right? Then the amount that's being contributed to presumed retirement, if you're able to retire, is lower. And then the cost of living is increasing too. You think about educational choices, right? And so the quality of schools are probably, or in a lot of cases, poor if we think about the relationship between educational system, housing, and poverty. So now you have to either outsource more money to provide your child education. So basically, the wages are stagnant, and then the costs are increased, and so the actual money that you have is less than it would be, and then you got to control for inflation too.
Wow. Go ahead. I didn't want to jump in front of one of y'all.
Oh no, go ahead. Okay. Out of your research, have you found that there is some kind of correlation between people who work in the working class and having children? I'm just curious to know.
So one of the part of what my research to make it more specific thinks about is it's looking at the broader trends about racism, right, and anti-black racism, and then how that falls along class and gender and sexual lines and what have you. And so to your point, what it seems as though is that the issue along class lines and children or family size has to do more so with the inability to afford, right, the child care, and if you're poor and or a single parent in that context, right? So not that I'm pivoting around it, but the issue is that someone with 3 kids, a 2-parent household with 3 kids, right, versus a 2-parent household, a single household with 3 kids, the presumption usually there is that there's a class difference. But even when there's 2-parent households with who are middle class versus 2-parent households who are impoverished, what that experience looks like is not the same, and it has to do with sort of the economic resources that are available too. So I want to give that thing, and then I want to make sure I answer your specific question again. So you said, ask me that question again.
I'm just wondering. Okay, for example, maybe you know the statistics between a working class 2-parent household. What would be the average income versus a middle class family and their average income, and if they have kids, how does that affect them based upon the money that they make? I'm just curious to know, because it seems that a lot of people who are in working class generally have kids, and like you said, they can't afford childcare. So it seems like, I don't want to say it puts them back further, but it definitely seems like there possibly might be a correlation.
Right. So I'm not exactly sure on the specifics of the statistics of that.
Okay.
But to your broader point, it not only does it put them back further intra-racially, but when we think about interracially as well too. And so as a general statistic, it requires 3 adult working people in black households to have the income of a 2-person white household.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And so there is, so sociologists have done this in this very fascinating study. And then that's just for income, thinking of wages. But in terms of wealth, it's 4 adult black people to have the wealth of a 2-person white household.
Wow.
What is it? Why is it that black people clearly have to work harder? I also wanted to ask, a lot of people say that the predicament that we are, like when it comes to racially, the predicament that we are in is not a lot of people say it's a classism issue. It's not a race issue. So just talk a little bit about the intersectionality of race and class and like how it all coincides and what it means.
Yes, I thank you. So I think that part of what that argument likes to do is to downplay the significance of racism. But even if we go back historically, even if we go back to after Reconstruction, and we think about, the beginning of migrations of formerly enslaved African Americans to northern communities, part of what happens here is there is people try to make the argument that it's the Irish or it's poor whites that are being pitted against the newly formed black people who are also poor. But that's actually only part of the issue. The issue with the white people is that they feel that the competition is exacerbated by the fact that these are black people who clearly are lower than them on the totem pole, right? And shouldn't have access to these jobs, that these are white men's working wages. And so even in that conversation, what we're doing is foregrounding the sense here that there's still this sort of white privilege, right? That's embedded into this conversation. So it's not that it's just poor people who are competing against each other for resources, is that these undeserving black people who are less than us are competing against jobs that we feel entitled to. And so you get this early history of the suggestion that is based on class when race is a very much significant part of that conversation.
So essentially, white poor people still feel a superiority complex is that we can all be poor, black,
but at least we're not black.
Right, so they feel as though they still got one up, and this is for us, it's not for y'all.
This is exactly what the case is. And so when you go back to this election, this traumatic day of November 6th, right?
Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry, November 8th, 2016. And so you think about that. One of the greatest political coups that Ronald Reagan is able to perform in the 1980s is to trick poor white people to come to the Republican Party to vote against their interests. And so part of what, when you talk to poor white people Republican, part of what they will say is that even though they may benefit from the enlarged welfare state where, the government is helping to support people when they need it, they feel like, one, they shouldn't have to do that, or they feel ashamed for that, or they feel like, this is not for us. And that's sort of why welfare is the face of black people and other people of color. And so there's this sense that, not only should we have more, right, but we definitely should have more than people who are not white.
Yeah, and
That's a good point.
You can see that even in the video we played, right?
Absolutely.
When you're looking at those numbers, a lot of them felt like the country's on the wrong path, and there's certain themes they don't like. But obviously, it has to be racially motivated, because even when they said that the economy wasn't doing well, in their opinion, well, how was that founded when 67% of you have homes?
Right.
When most of you feel like, despite not having a degree, I should be okay.
Right.
Most of you are employed in wages that allow you to live that way. Whereas for black people to live the way that a white person does in a two-parent household, and this does kind of relate to your numbers, typically you have to see one of us be a doctor or a lawyer, or somebody's in big-time sales and the other one has a big job in the government, just to make the same kind of money that a white guy who's a police officer, maybe his wife is a teacher or something like that, but because economically they have a head start because they got a house.
Right.
Or they get loan benefits and programs that we're not even privy to.
So it is not that we're just not, or when we are privy to them, it's an exploitative way, right? And so you think about the financial crisis, the subprime lending, right? And to whom that
they targeted Memphis and Tennessee. I can tell you that right now.
And black people in those areas, right?
It's the black loans.
And so it's the black loans. But when you go back and you think historically, and you think about how white people have wealth and income, and you think of the intergenerational transfer of wealth, and for blacks in particular, you think about the intergenerational transfer of poverty. Right, and that movement and what that movement actually means. But when you look at the government's role in redlining, when you look at the FHA's role in denying loans to black people, particularly when housing becomes such a significant a way of transferring wealth intergenerationally, then you can kind of see how this disadvantage has played out and continues to play out. The problem is that people, and I'm talking about white people, but it's not necessarily just them, have historical amnesia, and so the sense sort of that we get into the 1970s, and now there's equality for whatever that's supposed to mean. And what that really does is it ignores the fact that it's not true, which is important, but it also ignores when I like to think about the legacies of disenfranchisement. You have to think about this, that there were white towns in places like Virginia, not too far down the road, who closed the public schools rather than integrate them. I was attending this event, and this woman was saying that there was a place where they closed the public schools for about a decade. The white people sent their students to private schools. So you think about what that means for like basically 2 generations to not have had education, right? As a way to sort of avoid integration. And so when you think about these economic discrepancies and disparities, and you think about housing, you think about education, you think about jobs, you think about healthcare, I think it's just really important to understand the histories that bring us to this point. And it's not just about for them not to repeat, but it's about to sort of get this context as well.
You know, and something else that I don't think is talked about enough is like when you're looking at like our status versus, you know, someone else, like even when you look at jobs, I think sometimes we don't even take into account that a lot of jobs that would be black and working class are free through the prison system.
Right.
A lot of these companies that should be hiring employees for $15, $25 an hour, they're doing that labor for free. The uniforms that are made for the U.S. Army, all that stuff, that's free labor through the prison system.
And so this is sort of the exploitation on top of the exploitation, right? And so if we think about the criminal justice system as a way of extending chattel slavery, right? And so people don't like to think about that, because I do think that there's this sense that, well, once someone has committed a crime, that person should lose his or her rights. And the problem with that logic is that it just assumes that that the law itself was fair to begin with, or that the person, you know, deserved this, when we have all this evidence of how the system has worked again to further disenfranchise black people. So that's one thing. To your point about the prison system and is getting this free labor, and how that actually further thwarts the economy. But I wanted to actually say something that's been very relevant this week on this issue of unemployment, because what has been fascinating, you know, I guess liars always lie, and so the sense that you know, black unemployment is the lowest that it's ever been. Again, that there's such a distortion there. That statistic is based on people who are seeking jobs, right? So it doesn't account for for black people who've been pushed out of the workforce so much that they're not necessarily seeking. It doesn't account for the fact that the rate was only 1 point higher when the administration changed, and the fact that the black unemployment had been decreasing at a higher rate before that happened, right? And so it's just this interesting perversion of history in a way that is designed to, I think, undermine black achievement. And I'll just say that for now.
Go ahead. Did you?
Well, just going back to the video, we seen that it was 69% of black people won't escalate or expand from where their parents, they'd be worse off than what their parents were. So obviously the saying is, you know, you're supposed to take the baton farther than what you got it, and you advance it. So with that being said, if we're not gaining, not only are we not gaining or staying stagnant, but we're taking steps back. So that's to know that more than half of us that's happening to 69%. What is the answer? Like, obviously white supremacy has been here since before we've been alive. Like, what do we need to do to change this?
So first, for us to have a somewhat, I think, understanding of why that's happening too, right? Part of why that and it's very much connected, I think, to white supremacy in this way, I think. So when you think about why it is that people why they don't have more money than the previous generation, we think about what the costs are. So in addition to housing costs being more of a cost, having less job security, you know, having less pensions, having all of those mechanisms that would insulate you, you have to think about what it means to have intergenerational responsibilities, right? And so it's not about the effect of Medicaid, for example, getting cut, the effect of healthcare going up. Those rising costs are also being absorbed intergenerationally, right? And so now that a consequence of my income not going as far in terms of being just tangibly less has to do with the fact that I'm actually helping to take care of this family member, or I'm helping to finance something that the government or the state used to do, but they now have pushed back onto individuals to be responsible for too. So part of what the answer has to do with is I'm a firm believer in voting and its importance. I understand that is not the only way to hold people's feet to the fire, but I do think that policies that can allow people better opportunities and more access are tied to the legislative system that we currently have. And until we perhaps get a new one, we have to be in it to engage it in order to affect change. And recognizing that, and I've said this before on this other interview, but sort of what does it mean to have race-specific policies, and to think about, the feasibility of that, and if you have to couch it in something else to get that. So just as a small example, Chuck Schumer said on late Friday night, which I guess was early Saturday morning, that he offered, against the Democratic caucus's better desires, he offered money in a spending package for the border wall, and he didn't go on to say this, but my interpretation was, because he wanted those community centers funded, because of all the other things that were a part of what the Democratic agenda needed. He said, okay, and also I think the recognition that everybody's basically saying this is not really a wall, I think may have made him more comfortable. It may have made him more comfortable in making that. But the point I'm only making there is that sometimes you have to work within the system. There's a radical politic about using the system against itself, where we don't necessarily always think about that as being the case. So it is either or set it ablaze, but there's no plan after his burn down of what to put back together. And I'm not saying that that's what people are necessarily doing, but I am saying that there is something perhaps to be said for having these radical moments within the structures that are there versus disengaging, and now we're where we are.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, that was actually my next question. I was going to ask you, in order for blacks to advance, and in order for maybe more blacks to move from the working class to the middle class, does this mean that we're going to have to enter sections and permeate, becoming more lawyers so that we can create more policy? And like you said, work it from the outside in, because I don't know if we're really, I don't know if we're aspiring to do it or not, but do you think that we need to be the new politicians, that we need to aspire to change the policies that way?
Yeah, I think that's a part of it. But look, the fundamental issue here too is that, look, people are fighting for, generally people, what they're fighting for is perhaps less inequality, but not necessarily equality, which is to say that capitalism itself fundamentally operates on class stratification. So that if you get, at some point, the more people who move into the middle class will change the needle of what constitutes the middle class, because the idea here is to have more stratification. And so the question becomes, I had this lunch with one of my mentees early this week, and I was saying that, what does it mean to really construct affordable housing, right? That's safe, that has access to schools, that has all these features of a democratic community that can allow people to thrive. And I think that what I wonder is whether capitalism and the masses of people thriving are compatible.
My thing is, I think it's always going to be, like you mentioned, class stratification. But my question and issue is, why does it always have to be race specific? And it's been race specific since the beginning of time. So obviously, there's in capitalistic society, there's going to be a top, there's going to be a bottom.
Right.
But why is the bottom always racially specific?
Well, and
like, is the scales ever going to?
I'm not at this particular historical moment and everything that I see in the news. I'm not as convinced about our undoing that. So one of the most startling set of statistics that I expose students to in my race and racism class is sort of when we're supposed to have these metrics of equality. And so, it says things like, it'll be 2067 as an example before you have graduation rates that might be on parity, right? That it'll be 2152 before you close or other types of racial gaps, right? And that was in the 90s, presumably when these things perhaps were on pace at a different rate. The to your point, I think it draws our attention to the salience of racism, though, right? And so I think part of what your question is there a point at which proportionately you would have white people and black people represented among the poor in sort of the same measure?
Yeah.
And I don't think that is the case, because that would be diminishing. That actually would be diminishing racial inequality among the black poor, but that doesn't seem to be the direction that we're moving in. And I think that's for a complicated set of reasons, the least of which is not to include there is the sense that poor people are poor because of bad choices they make. There's a lack of critical analysis of structures of oppression about how poverty gets to where it is. And as long as we continue to do that and think in those terms, it's going to be hard to do the activist thought leadership, political policy, all of which I think are important parts of bringing that conversation together.
Yeah, and you know what? And I think there's also some retraining just within our community. We have to consider a lot of times when we talk about these themes, we're thinking about one particular group changing their mindset, but then also on us, there's some mindset to be changed. I've heard people that live here in the DMV think, well, because they have a decent blue-collar job or because they have a decent job, that maybe folks in the South or in the Midwest are somewhat lazy or not together. But I think what people don't realize, like right here in the DMV, it's easy to drive a bus. It's not hard to get a job like where I work at. But those jobs are almost impossible to come by when you're living in the South. Like I lived in Tennessee, and actually the place where I work at now, they denied me employment there. Then I applied up here, and they hired me just like that. And I've been climbing since I've been there. But because they don't have the same overarching opportunities that we have here in large scale, what happens is even the white people want those lower class jobs in Tennessee versus here, people don't want those jobs, whether it's in sales or if it's driving the bus or security, because there's enough lawyer jobs, there's enough upper managing jobs in the government or what have you that they seek after first. So it's not, so they're like, well, we'll leave everything else wide open. You want to manage and make, like I saw the advertisement the other day, you could work at Panda Express as a general manager and actually make $52,000 a year. That's the starting salary. That's not, it's not a lot.
But I see the ad. It says potentially, right?
Potentially.
Yeah, but I mean, still though, and a lot of those jobs in this area, because black folks are able to get the decent security jobs, they don't want it. Those end up going to Spanish and other immigrants.
But here's the interesting thing about what you're saying is that, and to our earlier point in our conversation, is that, and part of why they don't want to have those jobs is because they think that those jobs are beneath where their standing should be. And I think that's partially racially motivated. But the issue in somewhere like the District of Columbia is that $52,000 does not put you in
that is very
the middle class and questionably the working class, depending on where you live, because so much of your money is absorbed to everything else you have to pay, right? And so
one bedroom costs you $1,300 out here before y'all get to tripping,
right? And so the that's part of what the issue becomes. And then you could make $52,000 in the District of Columbia and be working poor.
Yes.
My question is too, though. So we know that obviously the middle class, back in the day, you can have a blue collar job and be in the middle class. But as black people, do we have to get in our heads to where we no longer want to be laborers? We don't want to these blue collar jobs. Like, do we need to take accountability upon ourselves to actually? I'm not from Tennessee. I don't know like what's going on in Memphis or what access they have to different jobs and stuff like that. I don't know if you want to be a lawyer in Tennessee, you could be a lawyer in DC, you could be a lawyer in Memphis, anywhere. But my question is, us as a people, do we need to start leveling up into what we aspire to want to do anyway?
We want to do both. And so,
I'm about to say that.
And
W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah. And part of what who I was reading earlier before I came over. Look, so there's two things. So, if we keep the conversation on what black aspirations are, which are important, and we keep the conversation on the jobs we take and the choices that we make, then part of what we do is miss the opportunity for a larger structural critique. And so, part of what we want to think about is how jobs are valued and money assigned to them, because that's part of what's at stake, right? And so the devaluation or the lack of valuation of, because it may not even be a devaluation, but the sense that some of the jobs that are very required to our daily living and daily thriving are some of the most seemingly underpaid jobs for whatever reason, right? And so because of skill set, but still they have a large utility, but they don't make that money. So I think that yes, there's the idea that we as Black people want to be represented in a realm of jobs, right? So not limited to these certain sectors, but when we are in these sectors, we want to have livable wages.
I get so mad, like when I go to Walmart or I go to Panda Express and I see so many of us, and we're doing. And I don't want to sound like I'm the person that's like, oh well, you're better than that. Why you're doing that? Everybody got their own personal decisions to make.
Right.
But at the same time, like we mentioned, the generational transfer of poverty or
Right,
wealth. Like
right.
at one point in time, we're all going to have to tell ourselves, you know what? I am better than that.
Exactly.
Like, I can't be 32 raising a family on a Panda Express wages.
Right. I can't. But also thinking about, well, why is it that I'm in this I want to say situation, but why is it that my job choices or opportunities have landed me at the Panda Express, to use your example? But we can aspire for the stars. If our aspirations are still manifesting themselves through American capitalism, then we are still going to have kind of this problem, and because there's going to be stratification, and the purpose of stratification is to price people out and to make these claims. I had done this career day at this elementary school in DC, and so the student was talking about something he wanted to do. And I said, well, what about, he was saying he wanted to be a barber. And I said, well, have you also thought about what it means to own a barber shop too, right? And so in the one hand, planting those seeds for entrepreneurship, which I think are important, and recognizing the complicity in capitalism by being an entrepreneur, and understanding that that's a radical tension to navigate. And so if I'm going to be on one side of that, I would rather be on the entrepreneur side of it, because for me, it would seem that I would then be able to give access to people who are in situations, who look like me, first of all, and who are in situations that I can then help them to excel to and have more as well. And so I think that that's, again, one of those moments where you're working in and against the system. But I do think that there's something very seductive about capitalism, and you can be all you want to be, and there's all these accesses to opportunity, but that's just a myth. I mean, that's part of why. That's part of how it stays in place.
Could it be, when you talk about how we need to shift the structure, could it be that the structure needs to change based upon nepotism? Because the way I look at my white counterparts, a lot of times they advance, not because they're better at the job than I am or because they're smarter. It's simply because their dad went to school with, that. So maybe if we help each other out, maybe because to me, the Latinos are moving fast because they help each other out.
Right. So I think that one of the issues becomes, how do we network? How do we use our networks? Are we using our networks? Why that matters too, right? And so one of the fascinating ways that I think of, we talk about this is the psychic hold of slavery, is sort of the notion that Black people are not as good. How that plays out in the way that we interact with each other, in the way that, in the risk that we're willing to take and not willing to take. And so I do think that there is something, for example, that's very important about seeing people in different types of positions, right? And so someone like President Obama, the significance of what he symbolized for Black aspirations, very important. And keeping in mind too that he is exceptional in the sense that most people won't have that opportunity, not simply to be president, but to have a Harvard law degree as well. And so one of the challenges historically, and Anna Julia Cooper talks about this, is that we have to be careful not to use the exceptional as representative of these experiences. And so you're just keeping these tensions you're keeping these tensions in conversation, because it's important to get the nuance, to get the complexity, and trying to figure out how to go forward.
It's true. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the Atlanta Compromise debate. all over again in a sense.
Booker.
Yeah.
That's a conversation for a whole.
It is, but but you gotta say a lot of the some of the key points here. It takes you back to that Booker T, WB Du Bois kind of conversation.
That debate
it
is
does
real.
That tension, and it does.
I see both sides.
And you do see both sides.
I feel like both sides should work together.
They do, and so, but a question that Du Bois, not sure my biases here. I told you I was reading, and Du Bois, there's something about self-reflection that goes a long way. So he renounces the talented 10th in the later years of life, and he recognizes the elitism. That is very much a part of, and he goes on to, but it's not that he just recognizes the elitism. What he recognizes too is the black middle classes or the black upper middle classes participation in the suppression of the black masses by being a part of this philosophy that's built on stratification, right? So that's kind of the beauty of what that revision turns our attention to. But nonetheless, one of the critiques that he makes of Booker T. Washington is not that there's not dignity in work, as Booker says, and not that you want to make your skills useful, but it puts in my mind the onus of eradicating racism and its legacies on black people, right? And which is historically always the case. So you're the problem and you have to solve it. So that's not going to work. And then the second issue is that he asks the question in Booker T. Washington, that is what is the utility of having a business, being an entrepreneur, of accumulating all of this land if you don't have any political rights to protect it? And so the deferral of political enfranchisement, that's what's at stake there, right?
Yeah.
And so we think about this 100 years later, where the Supreme Court is knocking down parts of the Voting Rights Act of '65, where they're now trying to the Supreme Court probably is going to rule that it's okay to purge people from voter rolls if they have not voted in an election or two. I mean, people have the right to not vote. And so, closing DMVs and doing all these tactics, but it's fascinating to see how black people are sometimes resilient and how they still, black people won't be alive if we weren't working around this system, right? From slavery into the present. And so it's fascinating to see that too, right? Yeah,
and I wish the conversation would go on, but we are running out of time.
Woo, dang, that time went by quick.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, these great conversations with these great guests, man, they just go. So, but before we go, we only have 3 minutes.
Oh, no.
So, one, tell people where they can find you, but then also, you have a book coming up soon that you're working on right now, right? Destructive Desires?
Yes.
If you could just give it like a 60-minute punch
on
what that's going to be about.
Okay.
We'll have to have you back again. Because this conversation we have to have in the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
I've been looking into it.
I welcome it, and I'm happy to come back. So, Destructive Desires, Rhythm and Blues Culture, and the Politics of Racial Inequality. It takes us back to the 1970s, and it basically makes two arguments. The first argument is that in the 1970s, the introduction of personal responsibility works to undermine the gains of the civil rights movement, and it helps people to buy into the fact that black people are not excelling because of the choices that they're not making. And it centers these discussions in the context of what I call black intimate relations. So it's about family, it's about relationships, right? And so these single households, these two-parent dysfunctional households, this is part of black people's problem. What I argue is that rhythm and blues culture, not just the music, but the culture more broadly, provides a space to imagine responses to these discourses and a way to get outside of them. And part of what the work is basically trying to do is say is that, rhythm and blues culture is not just about, or black culture and black art is not just sociology, but it's a place to reimagine fundamentally how we think about and understand the larger sociopolitical space. And so it just puts all these fascinating moments in conversation from the 70s until the present.
I like that.
When that book come out?
That's so interesting.
I'm already with you.
And so that's, so we'll see. So
when that book comes out, you'll have to come back.
I hope to do that.
Yeah, definitely. When it's time to push that to the masses, you come see the Nitty Gritty show first.
Absolutely.
Go put that in the Black Juice Book Club too. Yeah, for sure.
Black Juice got a book club, so you put in that joint too. Yeah. We gonna get you exposed. Look, it's been great having you on. Can you tell? Can you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me at RJ Patterson. That's on Twitter. That's the best place and the main place to find me. I've gotten better at that.
All the intellectuals are on Twitter, by the way.
I'm going to. I want to expand at some point in 2018, but not yet.
I feel you.
Got it. Hey, all the intellectuals are on Twitter. Everybody knows that. So, if you look for politics and you're looking for education, you got to go to Twitter.
Black Twitter.
Yeah.
Black Twitter.
So, definitely. That's great. And then, Tay, can you tell them where they can find the Nitty Gritty Show?
Yes, sir. As always, you can like our page on Facebook at The Nitty Gritty Show. You can also follow us on Twitter at TBJ_Nitty Gritty. And we are also on Instagram at The Nitty Gritty Show.
Yep. So, look, it's been a great show. Dr. Patterson, thank you for coming on. It's
great.
been a pleasure. I can't wait to have you back again. And we're not going to hold people up. Thank you guys for watching. Also, if you're in the DMV area or anywhere, because Tay will travel all the way to Thailand if you have an event, the Nitty Gritty Show wants to kick it with you. Yeah. So you have a business or you're having an event, or if you want us to come speak, hold a forum, let us know. We'd be happy to come down there, kick it with you, get your group exposed, even bring you on the show, talk more about it. But it's been a great show. It's your boy, Jay DaCosta.
It's your girl, Katniss.
And I'm the one and only Tay Jordan.
And together we are
the
Nitty Gritty. Look, y'all be blessed. Everybody be safe out there. Keep on voting. And me too. All the good things that are out there. Monique, you ain't getting $20 million.
Monique alone.
Get that black woman her money, man.
Man, we out. Jay, sign us out, man.